Today we're going to be talking about Chapter 9, Motivation and Emotion. Both of these words have the same Latin root, which means to move. There are a number of different theories about motivation, and all of them have four basic qualities that they try to explain. One is that motivation is activating. It stimulates us to do something other than what we were doing. It's directive. That is, it guides our behavior towards some specific goal or need, rather than just being generally activating. It has sustaining qualities. It helps us keep going until we meet the needs that we have. And finally, motives all differ in strength, depending not only on the person, but the situation. We could break these theories into 5 categories. One is those theories which suggest that we're motivated to satisfy needs. There's something that we are deficient in, and we're motivated to reduce that deficiency. A second type is drive reduction. There's something uncomfortable that we need to reduce. That is, for example, we might feel cold, and to reduce that feeling, we put on a sweater. A third type of theory has to do with the optimal level of arousal. How much excitement is comfortable for you? Fourth, the pleasure principle, first explained by Sigmund Freud. The idea is that we do things because they make us feel good. Finally, incentive theories, which are common in economics, are those which suggest that external factors motivate all of our behaviors. The classic satisfaction of needs theory is Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's important to note that Maslow never said that you must totally satisfy one level of needs in order to be motivated by a higher level, just that you must be sufficiently satisfied at a particular level before the next level becomes motivating. At the lowest level of the hierarchy are physiological needs, those that we need to stay alive. The next level is safety needs, which is not only physical safety, but safety from chaos. Above that are belonging and love needs, that is, people like us. Next are esteem needs, feeling good about yourself. And finally, the top level, self-actualization, which very few people reach and which is commonly misunderstood. Self-actualization is to be all that you can be, as in the old Army slogan. It's to meet your potential, not someone else's. Drive reduction theories are fairly straightforward. If you need food, you're driven by hunger to eat. If you need water, you're driven by thirst to drink. Drives are signals from the body that we need to do something, and when we reduce that need, the drive is also reduced. Drive reduction theories rely heavily on the concept of homeostasis, which is the tendency of the body to maintain physiological functioning within some fairly narrowly defined parameters. The set point is the point at which we are maximally in balance. We have some variability around that set point, but not too much. And this is true for body temperature, for oxygen levels in the blood, for various hormone and neurotransmitter levels, etc. Optimal arousal theories suggest that each of us has an optimal level of arousal where we are most comfortable and most effective. Arousal means physiological activity, such as heart rate, sweating, muscle tension. People vary in their optimal level of arousal. Some people are most happy while reading a book by the beach, others while jumping out of a perfectly good airplane. The Yerkes-Dodson law quantifies this relationship by showing that there is an optimal level of arousal for any given individual for a given task, and that levels of arousal below this are not sufficiently motivating, and levels of arousal above this optimal point impair performance by making the person too anxious. The fourth theory is the pleasure principle. This is Sigmund Freud's idea that people are motivated to seek pleasure and avoid pain. Very straightforward, and also quite consistent with Skinner's operant conditioning principles. If something leads to a reward, we want to do it. If something leads to punishment, we tend not to do it. Finally, incentive theories suggest that it is external rewards and goals that determine our behavior, not something internal to us. That is, we act in order to get something. There is a distinction between intrinsic motivation, where one is motivated by the activity itself, that is, we enjoy doing the activity, and extrinsic motivation, behavior is performed solely to get some external reward. In general, people's performance is much higher when they are intrinsically motivated than extrinsically motivated. What that means in practice is people will do better work when they enjoy the work than when they're doing it solely for the money. There are a couple of ways to think about this. Self-determination theory suggests that we want to feel good about ourselves. We want to have control and autonomy. So when someone gives us an extrinsic reward for doing something, it interferes with our sense of control. We feel like we did it just for the reward rather than because we wanted to. In contrast, self-perception theory explains the benefits of intrinsic motivation in a slightly different way. This theory assumes that we really don't know why we do most things. And so in those cases in which we don't have an obvious reward, we assume that the behavior we are evidencing reflects some internal desire. I drank that whole glass of water because I was thirsty. This makes us feel like we have control over our actions. One of our most important motivated behaviors is eating. Until the early 1900s, people assumed that hunger was due to stretching of the stomach. However, findings that people who had had their stomach surgically removed continued to feel hungry pretty much ended this theory. Modern theories rely on the balance of hormones and glucose in the bloodstream to explain hunger. The hypothalamus has receptors for all of these chemicals and adjusts our behavior in order to keep us in balance. For example, when empty, the stomach secretes a hormone, ghrelin, which causes us to feel hungry. One of the problems with dieting is that when people lose weight, an increase in ghrelin motivates additional eating, in part by making food more rewarding. So the body is designed to keep us from losing weight, even if our current weight is above what we'd want it to be. there are a couple of other physiological mechanisms that make losing weight difficult. In people who are overweight or obese, the reward system in the striatum is less receptive to dopamine and has a lower density of dopamine receptors. Thus, people need to eat more to compensate for the reduced pleasure of eating. In addition, cortisol, the hormone released by the adrenal cortex in response to stress, promotes hunger, reduces the brain's sensitivity to satiety, and promotes fat deposits in the abdomen. Therefore, people who are under stress are at great risk of gaining weight. Normally, the pancreas secretes insulin, which is a hormone that facilitates the intake of glucose by cells. When insulin production is insufficient, or when receptivity to insulin is diminished, blood glucose levels rise, and we call this diabetes. Leptin is a hormone that is secreted by fat cells and that reduces appetite. There is some evidence that people who are very obese lose sensitivity to leptin and are thus hungry all of the time. One area of the hypothalamus that is critical for determining hunger is the ventromedial hypothalamus, which is sort of an off switch for hunger. The young woman in the two pictures here underwent brain surgery, which accidentally damaged this area of her hypothalamus. This caused her to feel extremely hungry all the time and resulted in a huge weight gain. We also have circadian rhythms for appetite. Our internal bodily clock tells us when it's time to eat, and we get hungrier at those times. What we eat largely is determined by the experiences that we have growing up. We grow to like some foods and to dislike others. Of course, we have other needs besides eating. One of these is the need to belong or to have friendships. This is particularly salient right now since many of us have been unable to see family and friends for many months. Besides affiliation, we probably have other kinds of needs as well. For example, Murray suggests that we have needs for power, autonomy, achievement, and play. Achievement is probably the one of these that's been most studied. This is our need to maintain some level of excellence in some activity. And there are a number of factors that seem to play into our success in doing so. Goals themselves have a major impact on whether we achieve them. Ones that are too easy tend not to motivate us. Ones that are too hard become impossible to achieve. Self-efficacy, or the sense that we are able to overcome challenges, is a personal factor affecting achievement. Another factor is the ability to delay gratification. This was demonstrated in the famous marshmallow study conducted by the late Walter Mischel at Stanford. The study found that children who were able to sit in front of a plate of treats and not eat them for a period of time, that is, were able to delay their gratification, were years later better able to achieve their goals. Finally, grit is the term used to describe people's willingness to keep going in spite of obstacles that get in the way of achieving our goals. Emotions are our automatic negative or positive responses to either events in the outside world or internal thoughts. Emotions have physical, cognitive, and behavioral components. We can think of primary emotions as being ones which are consistent across cultures. In general, everybody in the world can express and identify these emotions. They include anger, fear, sadness, disgust, happiness, maybe surprise, and likely contempt. Blends of these primary emotions are called secondary emotions, and these include remorse, guilt, shame, submission, and anticipation. There are three major theories of emotion. The James Lange theory suggests that bodily responses are the basis for emotions. Some evidence for this includes the facial feedback hypothesis, in which the facial muscles that we use to express emotion provide us with information about what we're actually feeling. If you see the bottom two pictures on this slide, people who are engaged in a smiling behavior tend to interpret the world in a happier way than people who are engaged in frowning type behaviors. In the Cannon-Bard theory, an external stimulus simultaneously causes these bodily responses and separately the emotion. So these are two separate but simultaneous processes. Schachter and Singer's two-factor theory suggests a more complex process. There's an event in the outside world. This causes a change in physiology, and we attempt to explain that physiological change by looking around in the world to see if we have a cause. This can lead to the phenomenon known as misattribution of arousal. In one study, men who met an attractive researcher on a swinging bridge were more likely to think that she was attracted to them than men who met the same woman on a more stable bridge. The amygdala, a small almond-shaped structure in the brain, is important for processing the emotional significance of events and for generating immediate, automatic, unconscious reactions. There are two pathways through which information reaches the amygdala. One goes through the thalamus and directly to the amygdala. This is the quick and dirty system. The second goes through the cortex first, which gives us information about context and allows us to modulate our responses. But this takes longer. So we may have an automatic emotional and behavioral reaction to a stimulus before we've even processed what that stimulus is. In addition, two nuclei, or sets of cells in the amygdala, are particularly important for fear responses. The lateral nucleus links the CS and US, the conditioned stimulus and unconditioned stimulus. In some people, this is particularly sensitive, making them respond to things that others don't even notice. The central nucleus, which activates motoric responses to fear, is overreactive in some people, leading to a disproportionate response. So there are two systems at work here. One which determines which environmental events we will find threatening. Some people find more things threatening than others. The second system determines how we will respond to it. So when people have a disproportionate tendency to see things as threatening and to respond strongly, that combination can lead to what most of us would consider an over-response to a particular stimulus. This is a matter of brain anatomy and physiology, not choice. The amygdala is also involved in determining what people's facial expressions mean. That is, how is that other person feeling? You can see that this tiny structure has multiple important roles in our perception, emotion, and behavior. Most of us try to modulate or modify our emotions at times, and there are several different ways that we attempt to do this. Thought suppression, or attempting to not think about a negative emotion, tends not to work at all, and in fact tends to make it worse. Rumination, or consistently thinking about it, doesn't work very well either. What does seem to have some effectiveness is positive reappraisal, where we reimagine our evaluation of the event that led to the emotion. For example, instead of thinking about how unhappy I am that the current pandemic has restricted me to my home, I might think about all the money I'm saving on gas, not driving back and forth. Obviously, this approach has its limits. Other techniques that help to regulate particularly negative emotional states are humor, which has many emotional and physical benefits, and distraction. One needs to be careful about distraction, though, because if you distract yourself from one problem by thinking about another one, you haven't gained very much there. Cross-cultural research has shown that for the primary emotions at least, most people in most cultures can identify those emotions from people's faces, regardless of whether that person is from their culture or not. We all tend to smile in the same way when we're happy. Pride is another emotion that's expressed almost identically in each culture. And in fact, this is not even learned. The judo player on the right in picture B was born blind. Every culture has display rules, which are norms about how different people in the culture may display emotions. There typically are different rules for males and females in a culture, for people of different ages, and for people of different statuses. Far from being entirely rational, many of our decisions are influenced by emotion. This is not necessarily a bad thing. When we consider the consequences of different choices, one of the things we consider is how we think those choices will make us feel. If I feel that I'll enjoy chocolate cake more than cheesecake after dinner, that guides me in choosing the chocolate cake. Even negative emotions can have an adaptive purpose. Guilt is an emotion that strengthens social bonds. When we violate a social rule, we feel bad about it. We feel guilty. Without this, we might violate those rules and not contribute to the smooth running of our society. Just like anything else, though, guilt can be overused. When we're embarrassed, when we feel bad about violating a rule, or when people are teasing us, we often blush. Blushing is a clear and easy to identify manifestation of this emotion. As the writer Mark Twain once said, man is the only animal that blushes, or needs to. I hope that you've enjoyed this week's lecture, and I look forward to seeing you next time.